What's good, people? What's up, Falcons Nation? It's your boy Jew coming at you guys with my first episode of What's the Word Dirty Bird. It's been long awaited. I had to cancel the first two shows, but we're coming at you guys with my first episode. We're gonna get into the chat and see who's in the chat. We got V in the chat. What's going on? We got Eric. What's happening? Xavier Jones. What's going on, man? We're gonna get into this thing. We're gonna chop it up in a couple minutes, but I'm gonna be coming at you guys every Wednesday. I'm gonna be coming at you guys from 7 and probably maybe an hour, 30 minutes to 2 hours. But we're gonna get into it. The wife in the building. What's up, baby? Xavier, what's happening? And Just K Styles, what's going on? The six man's in the building. Dirty Bird on deck. All right. So we're gonna get into some topics. The first topic we're gonna get into is the Julio Jones trade rumors. We're gonna jump right into the trade talks. Julio Jones. But if you haven't already went over to Atlanta Falcons Nation, definitely go over to Atlanta Falcons Nation, hit that subscribe button. Everybody down from Mad Mike Sports, K Styles, Miss Maggie T, Twisted Torch TV, my channel, Jew Talk Sports. You guys definitely go hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. But let's jump right into these Julio Jones talks. So first off, if you haven't already seen, the rumors are out right now. We are after June 1st, which now we can trade Julio Jones and not take that big cap hit. We can save about 15 million if we were to trade Julio Jones. But currently, the rumors are that teams are not really looking. They're not really looking to trade for Julio. They're not willing to give us a first round pick, and it's looking like Julio Jones right now is not a hot commodity, as a lot of people might thought he would be. So personally, I feel like I want a first round pick, at least a first round pick for Julio. I'm not taking anything less than a first round pick for a guy like Julio Jones. If we're not able to get a first round pick, I've been standing on my channel for a minute now. I at least want a first round pick or a quality starter and maybe a third or fourth round pick. You guys seen on my channel, I talked about the Seattle Seahawks was a team that was currently in the market for Julio Jones. They were looking to possibly trade for Julio Jones. And I basically stated that I want DK Metcalf or I want a first round pick and a third round pick. I don't believe Julio Jones or DK Metcalf is Julio Jones, but I do think that he's a physical specimen. I do think that DK Metcalf has a very high ceiling, and I do think that trading for a guy like DK Metcalf that's on his rookie contract would possibly be a positive for our Atlanta Falcons due to DK Metcalf's upside. I do think that DK Metcalf is a guy that has great upside. He's around the same size as a Julio Jones at 6'3", 6'4", 245 pounds to 230 pounds. So I definitely think that DK Metcalf would be a great asset if we could get a player like him. I have seen a lot of people stating in my on my channel, like a team like Seattle is not going to be willing to give up a player like DK Metcalf for Julio Jones due to Julio Jones's age. And personally, I kind of agree with that. I don't think that Seattle Seahawks will be willing to swap Julio Jones for DK Metcalf because of Julio Jones, his age at age 32, and his injury history, due that DK Metcalf is much younger than him. Let's get to some of the people in the chat. What's up, J Rock? He in the building. Miss Maggie T. Tony Wright in the building. My bro in the building. VA in the building. What's going on, man? Miss Carrie in the building. She says, press. Okay, Arthur Smith today. If Julio will be in mandatory camp next week, and can basically just say we'll see. Exactly, and we're gonna get into that too, Miss Carey. But they did talk to Arthur Smith today. He talked about mandatory minicamp being next week, and they asked him about Dante Fowler. They asked him about Julio Jones. If Julio Jones will be at mandatory camp. Now, from what I'm hearing, Julio Jones he got a playbook. He knows when OTAs and he knows when mandatory minicamp breaks. I don't think that Julio Jones will be at mandatory camp though, because I really think at this point Julio Jones does want to be traded at this point. So I don't see him possibly showing up to mandatory camp. I think Julio Jones is going to set out pretty much everything. I don't even see him coming to training camp, to be honest, unless they start docking his paycheck. So let's see what Tony Wright. What's going on, Tony Wright? Yes, he says Seattle doesn't have the cap space or any first round picks. Exactly. That's why I don't think that we should trade for a guy like DK Metcalf. Yeah, Seattle doesn't have any first round picks because of the Jamal Adams situation. So you're correct on that. I don't think that they'll be willing to give us a guy like DK Metcalf. And like you said, they don't have the cap space. Most teams don't have the cap space to get a guy like Julio. So what's going on, Jamari? He in the building. Sean Jones, what's going on? You said he gonna be good. Chris White in the building, man. What's going on? Yeah, so basically with this whole Julio Jones deal, at this point, I don't think that I don't think we're gonna hear anything for a while. I really don't think that Julio Jones is gonna be traded for a while. I think we're just gonna continue to take phone calls and see what we can get for a guy like Julio Jones. As far as Arthur Smith and when it comes to Terry Fontenot, at this point, Arthur Smith has said he's going to coach the guys that are at camp. That's going to be at mandatory mini camp. He's not worried about a guy like Julio Jones at this point. It's not pretty much anything that we can do other than try to move Julio Jones. He basically stated that he doesn't want to be here. So at this point, like I said, I hate the whole trade rumors. I hate the whole trade talks when it comes to a guy like Julio Jones at this point. Just for the mere fact that it doesn't do us any good. At this point, I mean, I'm sure that locker room probably is in a disarray at this point. I'm pretty sure everybody in that Atlanta Falcons organization is pretty much upset at how it all went down as far as the Shannon Sharp situation. And Julio Jones basically stating what he stated, basically saying he was out of here. So at this point, like I said, I think we just basically got to wait and see. I really don't see Julio Jones, though, us getting a first round pick for Julio Jones. If it was me as the GM, I definitely would require at least a first round pick or multiple draft picks, but we'll have to just wait and see. I mean, at this point, I'm upset at the way that it went down because our backs are against the wall when it comes to a guy like Julio. We're not going to be able to, like I said, get what he's worth because teams know that he wants out. And at this point, the Falcons, we're kind of in a rock and a hard place. I really don't see Julio Jones being able to come back into the fold. Maybe the Falcons hold him out until we're able to get the deal we want. But I really don't see Julio Jones being able to come back in that locker room and these players look at him the same, being that he basically stated that he wants out. So this whole situation pretty much is a whole sticky situation. And I wish Julio Jones nothing but the best. I do think Julio Jones is a first ballot Hall of Famer. I thank him for everything he's done when he's been here with our Atlanta Falcons. I just feel like it's a sticky situation, and we're not going to be able to really, at this point, the Falcons really don't have any choice but to try to move him. So we may end up only getting like a second or third round pick or worse for him at this point due to his cap number. A lot of the teams are looking at that large cap number, and they're not wanting to take on that large contract. And a lot of these teams can't afford a Julio Jones contract. So even though the media has been saying on ESPN, Fox Sports 1, and NFL Network, all of the big platforms, they've been talking about Julio Jones going to teams like the Packers, going to teams that like the Patriots. A lot of these teams that are knocking on the Super Bowl door or that are contenders, they can't really afford a guy like Julio at this point. So I really feel like the Falcons at this point, our hands are tied, and we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. So we're going to jump into the next question that I have, or um the next section that I kind of want to talk about. What should we expect from the Falcons defense? And this is something that I really want to get into because I really think this Falcons defense is going to shock a lot of people. I do think that Arthur Smith and Dean Pease, him bringing over a guy like Dean Pease, who was in Tennessee with him. Dean Pease brings a lot of different things to the table when it comes to being multifaceted as far as blitzing, those zone blitz schemes and things of that nature. I think the Dean Pease is going to be able to get our defense at least top 15 in the top half of the league. I really think that this defense is going to go from being like one of the worst in the league this year or last year to this year being a top 15 team on the defensive side of the ball. And I really think that that's going to have a lot to do with Dean Pease's scheme. I talk about it all the time. I'm not too worried about the Atlanta Falcons offense. I really feel like our Atlanta Falcons offense is always in the top 10 when it comes to passing and things of that nature, because Matt Ryan is one of the greatest to ever do it at the quarterback position. And having a guy like Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, Kyle Pitts, and these guys, I'm not really too worried about Matt Ryan in this offense. Matt Ryan has thrown for 4,000 yards, 10 plus seasons in a row. Doesn't matter what scheme he's been in. He's had 3, 4, 5 offensive coordinators over the last couple seasons, and he's pretty much shown that no matter who's his offensive coordinator, he can put up points. The Falcons are, known for putting up 21 to 30 points year in and year out. So I'm not too worried about this offense, even without a guy like Julio Jones. I'm really concerned about this defense, and I want to see what we can get out of this defense. Now, I do expect this defense to be a lot better due to our linebackers. We have a lot of linebackers, a lot of great linebackers, and I really think that we have one of the best linebacking corps in the league. I feel like us going to a 3-4 scheme under a guy like Dean Pease is going to be huge. And I think a lot of guys are being overlooked on this defensive side of the ball. I don't think that a guy like Dante Fowler will have a huge year just on his own. I really expect, I'm not expecting one player to have like 10 to 15 sacks. I really think how it's going to play out for this Atlanta Falcons defense is it's going to be strength in numbers is what I say a lot of the times. And I really think it's going to be guys like Barkevious Mingo, guys like Jacob Tuioti Mariner, guys like Brandon Copeland that we brought in, guys like Dante Fowler, Don Kaminsky. I really think that it's going to be a lot of these guys getting you like 3 to 5 sacks this year. Guys like Steven Means that's still on this team, Marlon Davidson, Grady Jarrett. I really think that they did a good job in this offseason, Terry Fontenot, and bringing in multiple guys, bringing in great depth. And I'm a huge fan of strength in numbers, bringing in depth. If you guys remember when we had guys like Adrian Claiborne, guys like Brooks Reed on the defensive side of the ball, guys that we can sub in and out of the game. When we had Dwight Freeney in 2016, Jonathan Babineau and the guys that we had a lot of different guys on the defensive line that we can sub in and out of the game and keep the defensive line fresh. So I expect this team, this defense, to be very aggressive. I think guys like Deion Jones or Foye Oluokun are going to have huge years. Even a guy like Michael Walker, I really feel like in his second season, he's going to have he's going to take a huge leap in the second season with the team because he was a rookie last year. But he's a guy coming out of Fresno State that can bring pressure off the edge because he played a lot of edge rusher in college. He's a guy that you not only can play the linebacker position, the inside linebacker position, but he's a guy who can come off the edge and cause havoc as well. Guys like I said, Barkevious Mingo, he's a wild card to me. I think he's a player that a lot of people are overlooking, but I think that he's a guy also that can have a huge year for us and be one of those guys that's a situational pass rusher. Because if you remember when Barkevious Mingo came out of college, I believe he went to LSU. He was a first-round draft pick for the Cleveland Browns. So he's a guy that has been coached by the defensive line coach that we brought over. And he talked about Barkevious Mingo being at like 3 different locations with him on 3 different teams. And Barkevious Mingo is a guy who I actually took a look at, and they were talking about he's never missed a game in his career. Like he's played all 16 games pretty much on every team he's been on. He's been with the Patriots, he's been with the Browns, he's been with the Seahawks for a little bit, and now he was with the Chicago Bears, and now he's over here in Atlanta. So I really expect Arkevious Mingo to be that wild card that a lot of people are not talking about. He's a guy that's great on special teams, and he's a veteran guy that is not on the level of not on the level of a guy like Dwight Freeney, but he is a guy um who is a veteran who can come in and do some things. So I definitely think Barkevious Mingo could be one of those guys that could be the wild card on this team, could be a breakout player that a lot of people are not talking about. But I really think that this Atlanta Falcons defense is going to be a top 15 defense this year. And if we can be at the middle of the pack, I'll say anywhere between 15 and say like the 18, 19 defense in the league. And if we're a defense that can force turnovers, because I really feel like this defense, they may not be that great when it comes to yardage, giving up yardage, but I think that this is going to be a great defense as far as causing turnovers due to you not knowing what Dean Pease is going to do. He's a guy that's going to change up the schemes week in and week out on the defensive side of the ball. He says he's going to run multi-fronts, a 4-3, 3-4, and you're never going to know who's coming on the blitz, whether it's a safety, whether it's a corner, or whether it's a linebacker. And when you do that, when you mix up your defense, that's what Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots has been known for, is week in and week out, they change up what they do. They're like a chameleon. Whoever they're playing, they adjust to the opponent. And I feel like that's going to be huge for this Atlanta Falcons defense this upcoming season. So I definitely think that this defense is going to shock a lot of people. And I definitely think that this defense has a chance to take a huge leap, because I believe last year we were like in the bottom third of the league. We was like 28th or 29th in overall defense. So I definitely think this year we're going to shock a lot of people. I think that the sack numbers that have been down over the last couple seasons are going to come up due to us bringing pressure. If you remember when Dan Quinn was here with the last regime, Raheem Morris and those guys, they really didn't believe in blitzing a whole lot. Dan Quinn definitely didn't believe in blitzing. He wanted just to sit back in the cover three and allow the defense to keep everything in front of them. And we've seen how that worked out. You know, the defense was just too passive, and the quarterbacks in this league are just too good at throwing the football. And the wide receivers these days are just too athletic and too good for you to sit back and give them those underneath routes. I really feel like we're going to have to make teams adjust to us when it comes to our defense, and we're going to make quarterbacks and make offenses uncomfortable. And I really think that's huge. In this league, you have to get quarterbacks off their spot. You have to make the quarterback uncomfortable. If you allow the quarterback to be comfortable, they're going to pick you apart, and you're going to see that soft defense that we seen last year. So I really expect Dean Pease to bring that aggressive defense. Those zone blitzing schemes, as I talked about, I think are going to be huge. And I definitely think also that we're going to see a lot of opportunities for interceptions, tip balls at off the line, where quarterbacks try to throw the ball and someone comes, with pressure, and whether they're able to knock the football out of the quarterback's hands or whether they're able to tip the football at the line to cause turnovers, can cause interceptions. So I expect guys like AJ Terrell, the linebackers Deion Jones, Foye Oluokun on that second level. I expect these guys to get their hands on a lot of footballs this year, and I expect on that back end, guys like Richie Grant that we brought in as a rookie from UCF. I think that Richie Grant is going to be another guy that's opportunistic. He's going to be a guy that's going to be, baiting routes and jumping on routes and things of that nature. And I really believe that that's going to be huge for our Atlanta Falcons this year. Now let's get into my next question that I have. Are the Falcons playoff contenders in the NFC this year? Personally, I do believe that our Falcons are playoff contenders. I know it's really early to talk about playoffs and things of that nature. We just got out of OTAs, and now we're about to enter mandatory mini camps and things of that nature. But I never think it's too early to start talking about what we should expect out of this team this year. I don't believe that this year the Falcons have to make the playoffs. I don't believe that it's really any pressure on a guy like Arthur Smith in his first season to get this team to the playoffs, being that we were a 4-win team last year. I do believe that his leash is pretty long at this point, and that Arthur Blank and Rich McKay and those guys in the front office, Terry Fontenot, I believe that they're going to have at least 2 to 3 years to get this thing up and rolling, especially if Julio Jones is traded. I think they're going to give these guys a chance to bring in their scheme, be able to have a couple draft class coming here, and be able to bring in the players that they like, their style of players. Because this year, Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith kind of were handcuffed to being that the cap was so tight. They basically were handcuffed to use some of the players that were already here, and then they were only able to sign like guys that were on minimum deals, on 1-year deals. They weren't able to dive into free agency and really go after the players that, have their identity. They really weren't able to go after those type players this year due to the cap situation. So I don't believe that the pressure or the seat is hot for a guy like Arthur Smith coming in. I do think that they're going to give him a little bit of time. But personally, I think that this Atlanta Falcons team is going to make the playoffs this year. I know it's really early. We have to wait and see. But personally, if we're just projecting out over this season, I definitely think that this Atlanta Falcons team could make the playoffs. I really think that if you look at the games last season, a lot of people are talking about, Julio Jones being gone now that he's possibly going to be traded. But if you look at last season, Julio Jones being injured and missing I believe 7 or 8 games last season, that kind of was a blessing in disguise because we got to see this offense without Julio Jones out there. And if you remember last season in 2016, or actually in 2020, you got to see guys like Calvin Ridley. You got to see guys like Hayden Hurst, and you got to see how special guys like Kyle Pitts could possibly be being dropped into this offense. Because last year in the game against the Buccaneers, I believe we had a 17-0 lead at the halftime, which was crazy. That was a game played at home, and that was without Julio Jones. We had a 17-point lead. So just imagine dropping in a player like a Kyle Pitts, who has a chance to have an impact like a player like a Julio Jones. So if you drop in another all-star type, another Pro Bowl caliber offensive weapon with a better play caller and a guy like Arthur Smith, I really think we can see the Falcons win totals jump, especially because we have a lot of games this year that are really winnable. Just looking at the schedule, teams like the Jets that we got to play in London, all of the teams that we have to face in the NFC East, which was pretty much the worst division in football last year. We had the Cowboys this year, the Giants, the Washington football team. All of those games in the NFC East are winnable games. The first game of the season against the Philadelphia Eagles, that's a very winnable game because a lot of these teams have new quarterbacks or new head coaches. The Eagles with Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni as their head coach in game 1, that's a very winnable game for this Atlanta Falcons team. And it's a lot of games this year that we have where we're going to be facing rookie quarterbacks. We have the Jacksonville Jaguars, our team that we have on our schedule. That should be a very favorable game for us. So it's a lot of games this year that I think that our Atlanta Falcons should be favored to win. And I really feel like this team this year, I feel like we have a better coaching staff. Yeah, we have to wait and see, but I think pretty much any coaching staff would be better than the staff that we had last year with Dan Quinn and Raheem Morris and those guys. They just didn't understand making adjustments and things of that nature. They didn't do a good job at making adjustments. So I definitely think that this season is going to be huge. It's going to be huge for our Atlanta Falcons. I do expect our Falcons to win 10 to 11 games this season. I believe now it's 17. It's a 17-game schedule. So I think that our Falcons really have a chance to compete for the NFC South crown. If you look at the New Orleans Saints, who lost Drew Brees, if you look at the Carolina Panthers, who just brought over Sam Darnold from the New York Jets, so they have a new quarterback. If you look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they're pretty much the only team in this division that I think can really give us a run for our money. I really feel like the Falcons are probably the second most stable team in the division, being that we kept our core unit together. Yeah, we don't know if Julio's going to be here, but we still have Matt Ryan here. We still have Calvin Ridley, Russell Gage, Hayden Hurst, and now Kyle Pitts. So I really think that this Atlanta Falcons team is going to shock a lot of people. A guy like Mike Davis in the backfield, carrying the ball for us, who had a really good season last year, filling in for Christian McCaffrey. I think that this is going to be huge. A guy like Javion Hawkins that we brought in at that running back position as well. He's another guy that I think could have a big year for us, coming out of the backfield, catching the football and running the football and things of that nature. He's a very explosive guy. So I really think my prediction this year is possibly 11, either 10 to 11 wins. I'm thinking more on the side of 11 wins and probably about 6 losses. But I can see this Falcons team winning no less than 10 games this season, and that's cutting it. That's being nice, because looking at this schedule, it's not that tough of a schedule. Later on in the schedule, it looks like the schedule gets tougher because our bye week is kind of early. But I really think that this Falcons team is going to surprise a lot of people. Like I said, whether we have Julio Jones here or not, I expect this Falcons team to be able to put up points. And I expect a guy like Matt Ryan to be in the MVP category. I really think that Matt Ryan is going to have a huge year. He already has a huge chip on his shoulder because a lot of the fans and a lot of the media thought that the Atlanta Falcons were going to take a quarterback with that first round draft pick. But I believe that Arthur Smith, Terry Fontenot in the front office, putting their trust in a guy like Matt Ryan is going to pay huge dividends. And I expect Matt Ryan to have a big year. If Julio Jones is traded, I could really see Matt Ryan spreading the football around even more, because sometimes when you have a number one, target like a Julio Jones, you want to focus on, getting them the ball, where everything is, centered around your best wide receiver. But now with a guy like Julio Jones being gone, possibly, that's just going to allow Matt Ryan to spread the ball out a lot more. And I think a guy like Arthur Smith, being that he understands matchups and things of that nature, I think it's going to be huge having him, especially when it comes to the red zone offense. I really expect our red zone efficiency to be a lot better. And I really think that Arthur Smith is going to do a good job of focusing on the running game, because I really feel like that's where all fell apart with the Atlanta Falcons the last couple seasons, was the running game. If you can't run the ball, it's really hard to score touchdowns when you get down in the red zone, when you're not playing physical football, because the field is so condensed. You have to be able to play hard-nosed downhill football when you get in the red zone. And I think that that's where we're going to see the biggest leap from this Atlanta Falcons team, is in the running game. Over the last couple of seasons, K Styles had basically stated in his show, he basically showed a chart where it showed our Atlanta Falcons pretty much the bottoms of the league the last 3 years when it comes to running the ball. And if you remember in 2016, when we had one of the best offenses in the league, when Kyle Shanahan was here, everything was predicated off of the run. Whether it was play action with Devontae Freeman, Tevin Coleman, and those guys, they really did a good job of running the football and opening up the passing game, opening up passing lanes for Matt Ryan in the middle of the field. Guys like Austin Hooper, Jacob Tammy, those guys were able to eat. And Julio Jones and those guys also were able to eat. Guys like Taylor Gabriel, Bahamas Sanu, they were able to catch, slant patterns and things of that nature and take it to the house, because that running game was so potent, they had to respect it. But with that being said, I kind of want to get into some of you guys' questions as well. So we're going to open it up here for a little bit of Q&A as well. I want to hear what you guys have. I want to answer some of your questions. But just stating, just recapping, I definitely think that the Falcons have a great chance this year at competing. I said in my last video, and a lot of people probably think that I'm crazy for saying this, but I really could see this team making a deep playoff run. I really think that this team has the talent to get to an NFC Championship game and possibly get to the Super Bowl. And if you don't, if you wonder why I say that, if you look, just go back to 2016. A lot of people, heading into that season, they didn't think that the Falcons were a playoff team heading into 2016 because we didn't have a great season in 2015. The first year that Kyle Shanahan and Dan Quinn were here, I believe Dan Quinn went 8-8, and then the following year, Matt Ryan kind of struggled the first year in Kyle Shanahan's system. Then in that next season, 2016, we basically hit the ground running, and that offense was one of the greatest, offenses of NFL history. So I feel the same thing could possibly happen for this Atlanta Falcons team. It reminds me a lot of 2016 because we brought in a lot of young defensive players in the draft, and that was pretty much the same thing that we did, if you remember, back in 2016 when we brought in guys like Devondre Campbell, we brought in Deion Jones, and we brought in a lot of young players that were able to be impact players. We brought in a Keanu Neal. So I really think that guys like Richie Grant that we brought in, guys that are in their second year, like AJ Terrell, guys like Michael Walker. I really think that those guys are going to be impact players this year. I think they're going to take the next step. A guy like AJ Terrell, who's entering his second season, he didn't even have rookie minicamp or OTAs last year due to COVID. So he basically was kind of just dropped into the fire, and he played pretty well for a rookie. So I definitely think that he could be a guy that takes the next step, could possibly even shock a lot of people and be a Pro Bowler, depending on how many interceptions he's able to get and how many impact plays he's able to make. But last year, AJ Terrell was one of I think he graded out on Pro Football Focus as like the best cornerback when it came to the guys that were drafted, the DBs that were drafted last year. It says a lot because a guy like Jeff Okudah, that was taken by the Lions. I believe he was taken like with the fourth pick in the draft or something like that. AJ Terrell was graded even higher than him. So I really expect a lot of the guys last year that didn't get opportunities, like Quadri Olson, I expect a lot of those guys as well to take the next step. But with that being said, I do want to jump in and get some of you guys' questions and hear what you guys are saying in the chat. Let's see. So Albert Smith, he says, Drew, my question is, what if we will the Falcons do not trade Julio Jones? Personally, I think Albert, I think that the Falcons will trade Julio Jones. I don't think that Julio Jones is going to be. I do think that Julio Jones. I do think that, like I said, Julio Jones is a special talent, but at this point, I don't know if this can be salvaged because of the way that it went down, the way that he basically stated that he didn't want to be here on live television. I don't know if it'll be if he'll be able to come back from that. I don't know how those players in the locker room feel about him, and I really don't know how the front office possibly feel about him. I know Arthur Smith is a guy who seems like he's about his business, and he really doesn't care about players' feelings and things of that nature. He's all about business and about winning games. So I could definitely see Arthur Smith, if he shows up at mandatory minicamp, I could definitely see Arthur Smith welcoming him back with open arms. But I don't know if the other players will welcome Julio Jones back, especially these young guys who's never played with Julio. Some of these guys, they look up to him, like Frank Darby and some of the guys like Kyle Pitts and things of that nature. I don't know how they're going to, take to a guy like Julio Jones, especially because Julio Jones is a guy that's been a mentor the last couple seasons. I'm not too sure how Matt Ryan, how Calvin Ridley and these guys feel about a guy like Julio Jones. I know Matt Ryan and Calvin Ridley and those guys understand that it's a business, but I'm not too sure of what they feel, how they feel about a guy like Julio Jones coming back into the fold, especially because at this point they may not be able to trust, is he 100% in? You know what I'm saying? So I'm not too sure about welcoming a guy like Julio Jones back in the fold at this point. Personally, I think we'll be best off allowing a guy like Julio Jones to go to another team at this point, get a fresh start. And I think that it may be good for our Atlanta Falcons at this point, being that Julio Jones made it public that he wants to be traded, and basically he kind of is looking for a new contract. I don't really see the Falcons bringing him back. Now, if we're unable to get anything back for him, meaning like teams are offering us only like a 4th round pick or something like that, or a 3rd round pick, maybe the Falcons think about it. But I think it's going to come down to the front office. they're going to all have to sit down. Arthur Blank, Terry Fontenot, Arthur Smith. If he does come back to the team, he is basically everybody's going to have to sit down and they're going to have to hash out the differences to see if it's salvageable. At this point, I'm not too sure that it's salvageable. I think that Julio Jones has the talent, and of course, I wouldn't mind having him back on the team. But I don't know how those players in that locker room are going to take to him, and I really don't know at this point how the front office feels about him after the statements that he made. But that's a good question. Let's see here. Okay, Tony Wright says, "Do you believe that wide receivers Zacchaeus could have a 500-yard year if he gets more playing time?" I definitely think that a guy like Zacchaeus could have 500 yards or more. I'm not too sure. It depends on if Julio Jones is here. If Julio Jones is still here, then Zacchaeus probably will get limited snaps. He probably will be a special teams player. But if Julio Jones is gone, I could easily see a guy like Zacchaeus possibly getting 500 yards or more because he's a guy that takes the top off the defense. And Arthur Smith loves scheming guys open and using players, at their best, putting players in the best positions to succeed. He's kind of like Kyle Shanahan when we had a guy like Taylor Gabriel. Kyle Shanahan understood guys' skill sets. And I think that that's something that's huge with a guy like Arthur Smith. He understands the skill sets of a guy like Zacchaeus or any of the guys on this team. He understands how to put guys in the best positions to succeed. So it wouldn't surprise me for a guy like Zacchaeus to have over 500 yards, even though we're loaded on the offensive side of the ball. Even without Julio, we still have Calvin Ridley, we still have Russell Gage, we still have guys like Hayden Hurst and Kyle Pitts. So it's only one football. So 500 yards may be a little bit much, depending on if Julio Jones is here and depending on what schemes we run. Because I also think that Arthur Smith, similar to like a guy like Dean Pease, is going to be a guy that's going to be multifaceted on offense as well. And I really could see the Falcons being a run-heavy team against certain opponents. Depending on who we're playing against, I believe this offense will change, shift gears and change and adjust depending on the team that we're going up against that week, because we have so many guys that are versatile on this offense. Guys like Kyle Pitts, who can play not only the tight end position, but he can play wide receiver. You have guys like Hayden Hurst, who's another guy that people forget about because we have Kyle Pitts. Hayden Hurst is a guy you can split out wide as well. He has the speed, and you can put him out wide. He's a guy who can play in the slot as well. So it's a lot of guys that, it's not a lot of footballs to go around, and it's a lot of guys on this offensive side of the ball that's talented. A guy I think that's going to take a huge step forward if Julio Jones is traded is a guy like Russell Gage, because that makes him basically the number 2 wide receiver on the roster. So before a guy like Zacchaeus, I think Russell Gage would be the guy to keep an eye on. And I think that he would probably be the guy that's going to be able to take the next step and possibly be a guy that can catch, have 1,000-yard season, depending on, what route we go in. Even though I think that we're going to be, like I said, more of a run-heavy team, especially if Julio Jones leaves. If Julio Jones is traded, I really could see this team being a run-first offense, and then everything is predicated off the run, play action pass, and taking deep shots down the field with guys like Calvin Ridley on the outside, and then Hayden Hurst and Kyle Pitts basically men in the middle of the field on those slant patterns and things of that nature, those seam routes. I could easily see us being kind of similar to like a RPO style offense where Matt Ryan puts the ball in the belly of the running back and looks to throw the ball up the seam to guys like Hayden Hurst, Kyle Pitts, who's going to be in mismatch situations because of their size and because of their speed. So I definitely could see Zacchaeus having a decent season, but 500 yards, that all depends on what direction Arthur Smith decides to go in. Let's see here. Says, hey, Jew, if Julio and his contract leave after we restructure Grady's contract, do you think we possibly re-sign Hurst after this season? He could make an elite duo with Pitts in the future. I think this is a great comment, Joseph. I don't know about bringing back a guy like Hayden Hurst. I think it's possible, but really, I think that we should use that money if Julio Jones does decide to leave or is traded, I really think that the Falcons may look at bringing in a defensive type player, an impact player on the defensive side of the ball. Personally, I think we have enough weapons already on the offense, and if we be completely honest, you could always go in the draft next season, especially if we trade Julio Jones and get a second, third round pick, or even a first round pick. You can use some of that draft capital to go out and get a quality wide receiver or get another quality tight end. I mean, we see it every year. Guys like Justin Jefferson that came out with the Vikings last year on his rookie year. He basically caught over 1,000 yards, and I believe he made a Pro Bowl last year out of LSU. This year, you've seen guys like Devontae Smith out of Alabama, Jalen Waddle. I mean, these guys come out of the draft every year. So even tight ends, you can find another great tight end in the draft possibly, or you can possibly go in the free agency market and possibly bring in a guy that may cost a little bit less, because if Hayden Hurst has a big season this year, another team is possibly going to overpay for him, especially because we didn't pick up his fifth-year option. We basically would be in a bidding war at this point if we wanted to keep a guy like Hayden Hurst. So after this season, I really don't see the Falcons bringing back a guy like Hayden Hurst due to us having to pay other guys. Like if you even look at the defensive side of the ball of this team, we have guys like a Foye Aluakon that's going to need to be paid. We have guys in the future like AJ Terrell that we're going to want to pay. Even a guy like Dante Fowler. A lot of people are forgetting that he restructured his contract, and this year pretty much is the last year of his deal. So if he has a big season for us, he could be a guy that we may want to use that money on and keep a guy like Dante Fowler here, being that we need the help on the defense. So I really don't think that it's a possibility that we can bring back a guy like Hayden Hurst, and then also a guy like Calvin Ridley, who we did pick up his fifth-year option. He's another guy that's going to need a contract, a new contract in the next year or so. So I really don't think a guy like a Hayden Hurst can be brought back because there's so many other guys that we're going to need to pay that's veteran guys on this team. So I think after this season, Hayden Hurst probably goes on the greener pastures and probably signs somewhere else because we're not going to be able to afford him unless he takes a pay cut, which I don't see him doing that because the Falcons didn't pick up his fifth-year option. But I do think that was a great question or a great statement. Let's see here. Corey the God says, Drew, do you think Deion Jones will play outside? I think we're going to see these guys all over the place. Like, I don't think that Deion Jones is only going to play the Mike linebacker like he's pretty much played the last couple seasons with a guy like DQ that was here and Raheem Morris and those guys. I really think that they're going to use Deion Jones and all of these linebackers. They're going to line these guys up everywhere. So you could easily see Deion Jones being a guy that they use in blitz situations, because when they were talking to, I believe, Frank Bush, who's the linebackers coach, he already basically talked about us being able to use Deion Jones to be a blitzer. They like what they saw out of him last year because of his speed. They like what Julio Jones. They like what Deion Jones brought to the table. So I definitely think that you can see him play a little bit outside, but I think they're going to mix and match. I think you can see Michael Walker at that Mike linebacker sometimes. You're going to see Foye Aluakon lined up inside and outside sometimes. But I think you'll see Deion Jones lined up everywhere. I don't think they're going to just line these guys up in one spot. I think they're going to be very exotic up front. And we're going to see a lot of different things, guys standing up all over the defensive line. So you're not going to know what player is coming on blitzes. They may have all the guys at some point standing up on the line just to try to confuse offenses and confuse quarterbacks and things of that nature. So I definitely think that Deion Jones is going to line up outside. But if I'm Dean Pease, I'm mainly using Deion Jones as the linebacker to cover running backs and to cover tight ends, because to me, that's what Deion Jones does best. I do want to see Deion Jones also getting after the quarterback and spying on quarterbacks and things of that nature. But I think his number one skill set is being able to shut down guys like Alvin Kamara coming out of the backfield, shutting down guys like Christian McCaffrey, because we have a lot of running backs in this division that are very good at catching the ball out of the backfield. And you're going to need linebackers that can cover. And to me, our linebackers are probably the best coverage linebackers in the NFC South and in the NFL. To be honest, Foye Khan and Deion Jones probably are two of the best coverage linebackers in the league. Even a guy like Michael Walker is a pretty good coverage linebacker. So I definitely think that we're going to see, all of these, not just Deion Jones, but all of these linebackers lining up somewhere everywhere. Let's see here. And I like this question here. Jamar says, "Do you think Isaiah Oliver might break out this year?" I definitely think that Isaiah Oliver could be a guy that could have a big season. And I think it's because Dean Pease, they're going to know how to use him. I think they're going to put him in the slot where he played like that nickel position last year. I think you can see him a little bit play a little bit of safety this year as well. But Isaiah Oliver is a wild card, kind of like a guy like Barkevius Mingo, who I mentioned earlier. Isaiah Oliver is a guy to watch because he's a physical corner. Him and AJ Terrell are really physical to be cornerbacks. Those guys are not afraid to tackle one-on-one, tackle running backs, tackle tight ends. And I think that Isaiah Oliver is going to have a big year because they're not going to put him on an island on the outside. I really think he's going to be kind of used as a Swiss Army knife type player where you're going to see him kind of play that kind of play a Keanu Neal role, if you would. I think he'll be a guy that you're going to see come down in the box sometimes and be a blitzer, and he's going to be a guy that we use kind of like a Brian Poole when he was here because he's physical like those guys were. If you remember when Brian Hill was not Brian Hill, but Brian Poole was here, he was a guy that I basically stated he played the game with the physicality of a linebacker, even though he was a corner or a nickel corner or safety. To me, Brian Poole was a guy that was physical, and we kind of used him as a poor man's Jamal Adams, if you would. He was a guy that was not afraid to tackle, was not afraid to come off the edge and blitz and things of that nature. And he was a sure tackler. And that's what I think Isaiah Oliver's role should be on this team. I think he's a guy that's physical, is good at tackling in space. He's not the best when you put him in man-to-man situations like on an island because he's not the fastest guy. He has the short area quickness. So I think if you want to use Isaiah Oliver to the best of his ability, you should put him on the inside at the nickel role, or you should use him where he's at the line, at the line of scrimmage as a blitzer. I think that's the best role for a guy like Isaiah Oliver, where he's kind of roaming all over the field. I don't think he's best when you just place him in man-to-man coverage, and that's not his best. That's not where he's best suited. But I do think that if you put him back in at a safety position, I do think that he would be better maybe at a safety as a safety than he was when he was on an island as a cornerback position last year, due to the fact that he would have everything out in front of him. And being that he takes the angles when it comes to making tackles and things of that nature, he may make a solid safety, like when you're playing two high safeties. I definitely think that Isaiah Oliver could be a guy that's opportunistic, could be a guy that can make big hits, come down and somebody try to come across the middle. He's a guy that could make big hits, kind of like a guy like a Keanu Neal. And he's a bigger cornerback. I believe Isaiah Oliver is like 6'2". He's one of the longer, bigger, physical style cornerbacks, like Dan Quinn, like when he was here, built more like a Richard Sherman type. So I definitely think that Isaiah Oliver could be a guy that could get you, 90 plus tackles. Because I believe that's what his best asset is running and hitting and being, a physical style player. So I definitely think he's a guy that really shouldn't have, be labeled as a corner or a safety. He's a guy that's a Swiss Army knife. You can pretty much use him all over the defense, not just as a secondary piece, but you can use him kind of like a piece on the chessboard where you can kind of move him all over the place. So I really think the Dean Pease is going to have a lot of different playmakers are going to be able to use these guys in a lot of different ways. But I'm very excited to see what he does with a guy like Isaiah Oliver. Let's see here. Joseph says Walker and Fowler Jr. will be studs this season. I'm so excited about our linebacking core this year going into a 3-4. Yeah, I've been saying it for years. Me, Matt, Mike, K Styles, we talked about it on the Heavy Hitter show last season. We ran some 3-4 principles when Dan Quinn was here, but we never stuck with it. And I think that was one of the biggest problems for our Atlanta Falcons defense is we had a lot of guys that were outside linebackers that really shouldn't have been playing with their hand in the dirt, but they should have been guys that were basically coming off the edge like an outside linebacker, because we had a lot of guys that were really athletic. Now, I do think one of the problems that we had when we did run some of those 3-4 principles when Dan Quinn was here is we didn't have enough big bodies on the inside of the defensive line. Because when you run at 3-4, you need a 5 tech, 300 plus pound, 300 to 15 pounds to 330 pound big guy that's just a plug that can stop the run and things of that nature. And I don't think that we had enough of those guys. If you're going to run 3-4, if you look at teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers, who religiously run the 3-4, they're a team that always have big guys in the trenches. Right now, Stephon Tuitt, a guy who's like 6'6", 315 to 320 pounds. If you look at the guys that they've had over the years, Cam Hayward, on that defensive line with the Pittsburgh Steelers, they always have those really big guys in the middle. If you go back years, guys like Casey Hampton that played with the Pittsburgh Steelers, that was 320 plus pounds. That's what you need if you're going to run a 3-4 defense. You need those guys on the inside. Now, I think this team has those guys like Marlon Davidson, who can be a guy that takes us the next step this year out of Auburn, that you can play next to a guy like Grady Jarrett. And then we brought in 2 guys that were free agents that we signed, that both of these guys are like 330 pounds plus. So I really think that those guys are going to help this Atlanta Falcons defense. And I think that we have the size now that we need up front. But we may need to bring in, if we do decide to get rid of a guy like Julio Jones, I expect us to possibly bring in another impact guy that can play that 3 tech or play that nose tackle position. We do have guys though like Tyler Davidson as well, who to me, I think he's kind of underachieved since he's been here in Atlanta when he came over from the New Orleans Saints. But he is a big body, but I prefer guys that are longer. I wanted a guy like Marvin Wilson, I believe his name is, out of Florida State. He was like 6'3", 6'4", 320 plus pounds. He was a guy that I wanted the Falcons to draft. He actually went undrafted and signed with the Cleveland Browns. So I definitely think, though, that this linebacking core is going to be very successful this year as far as getting after the passer. Like Michael Walker, Dante Fowler, even guys like Afoye Oluokun and Deion Jones last year, who had 5 sacks. I can even see those guys getting in the mix because we're running that 3-4. We're going to see those guys on the edge as well, being able to get after the quarterback. So I definitely think that we could see some big things this year out of the linebacking core. And personally, I think that the linebacking core is the best part of our defense. I think that second level of our defense, Deion Jones, now Dante Fowler, who's listed as an outside linebacker, Afoye Oluokun, Michael Walker. I think that that's the strength of our defense. I think that those guys, are the stars on the defensive side, other than Grady Jarrett and AJ Terrell. I think that the linebacking unit is the most solid unit from top to bottom. Guys like Barkevious Mingo that I mentioned, that's the most solid part of our defense to me currently is that linebacking core. So I really expect some big things from the linebacking core. Let's see here. And y'all keep putting the questions. I see a ton of questions. You might have to re-put your question in here. Let's see here. All right. So it says, Drew, how well do you think our safeties are going to play? I think that our safeties are actually going to play really well this season. If you look at the guys that we brought in, Harmon, we brought him over, who's a long time ex-New England Patriot, Deron Harmon. He played with the Detroit Lions last year. And we got a guy like Eric Harris, who came over from the Las Vegas Raiders. I think those guys are veterans. They're very, very savvy, very smart guys. They're not the most athletic guys. They're not going to wow you with athleticism and things of that nature. They're not known as the top safeties in the league. But Dean Pease, the scheme that he runs, he doesn't need guys that are top flight because he's going to mix and match these guys and put these guys in great situations. So I think that our safeties are going to play well. I really think the star in that safety room it's going to be Richie Grant. I really think that Richie Grant was the guy brought in to be that wild card, the guy that who can take the football away, the guy that's very opportunistic. If you go look at a guy like Richie Grant's college tape, when he was at the University of Central Florida, he was one of the best playmakers on their defense when he was in college. And he's a guy that can do it all. He's a guy that can tackle. He's very physical. He's a guy that can also take the ball away as far as interceptions, and he's a guy who can force fumbles. So he's a guy that can be that eraser. I look at him as being that honey badger on our team, him being the playmaker on the defensive side of the ball on that back end as far as the safeties. And I think Eric Harris and Deron Harmon, they're going to be guys that's just going to be in the right place at the right time. If you go look at Deron Harmon's stats, he's a guy that's had a number of interceptions when he was with the New England Patriots because he was just a guy that understood Bill Belichick's scheme. He was a veteran savvy guy. He understood being in the right places at the right time. He never was a guy that was going to wow you with his athleticism. But I think him and Eric Harris, both of those guys are solid veteran guys. And I think that they're going to be able to help these young guys come along. Another guy that we're not mentioning in that safety room is Hawkins, who we brought in last year that we drafted. He's a guy that also can also take a step forward as a safety for our defense. So I definitely think that we shouldn't overlook Hawkins as well. He's another guy that's we drafted last year that could take a step forward. He didn't play a whole lot last year due to him having a concussion, I believe, in one of the games. I think it was against Green Bay where he got in the game and actually got a concussion, and he only played a couple games last year on the defensive side of the ball. He was mainly used as a special teamer, but I definitely think that the safeties could play well or are going to play well this year. But I think they're just going to be guys that's going to do their job, be in the right place at the right time. They're not going to wow you, like I said, with athleticism. They're not going to be, the best safety unit, in the NFL by a long shot. But I definitely think that we have some playmakers back there in Deron Harmon, who's a guy that will take the football away. Even Eric Harris has had his moments with the Raiders where he had a couple of returned interceptions for touchdowns. He's a guy that's just a solid veteran, plays hard, and is a guy that's willing to take guys under his wing because they say that him and Richie Grant were working together during the offseason when Richie Grant was going through the draft process. So him and Eric Harris have already built that camaraderie and that brotherhood. So I definitely think that a guy like Richie Grant is going to be able to learn a lot from guys like Deron Harmon and guys like Eric Harris, even though I think that those guys are mainly here to be bridge guys, to come in and basically be veteran guys to teach these guys like Hawkins and to teach these guys like Richie Grant, help these guys in film study and things of that nature, help these guys come along. But I definitely think that our safeties will possibly have a pretty decent season. But I expect the most impactful player, I think, in that safety room is going to be a guy like Richie Grant. I think Richie Grant could have a chance to be a Pro Bowl caliber safety for our team. Let's see here. All right. So Albert says, Jew, who is going to let's see here. That's not the oh, he says who's gonna be the Falcons' best rookie? Um, that's a hard question. I'll pick one on the offense and one on the defense. I'll say on the offensive side of the ball, I think the best rookie is going to be probably Kyle Pitts is the obvious answer because of his freakish ability. I think Kyle Pitts is going to be special, but a guy that I think is a wild card or a sleeper on the offensive side of the ball is going to be Javian Hawkins. I think Javian Hawkins is a special running back, and I could see him being an Atlanta Falcon for a really long time, being that he's a guy that's can catch the football. He's a guy that fits the current NFL landscape. He's kind of like an Alvin Kamara type as far as being able to catch the ball out of the backfield and things of that nature. But I definitely think that he could have huge success this season. I think the Javian Hawkins though will be one of the most underrated rookies, I'll say, this upcoming season. But as far as Kyle Pitts, I think he easily will be the best offensive weapon on our team. Just because, like I said, his freaky size, I think he'll be a guy that can score multiple touchdowns in the red zone. I think he is a guy, if Julio Jones is not here, that the Falcons will look to throw the ball to a lot in the red zone. And when it comes to moving the chains, I think he's going to be a guy that Matt Ryan looks to throw the ball to on third downs, like in third and shorts and third and mediums. I think because Kyle Pitts is kind of built like a guy like Tony Gonzalez when he was here, as far as his height goes, I think that Matt Ryan is going to look for a guy like Kyle Pitts. Anytime it's third and short, or anytime he thinks that he has the mismatch, I think that Matt Ryan is going to be looking for a guy like a Kyle Pitts. Let's see here. Now on the defensive side of things, though, when it comes to the rookies, I think Richie Grant is a guy that I think will be the best rookie on the defensive side of the ball. I just think that Richie Grant has the star ability. I think he's a guy that's very versatile, a guy that can blitz, a guy that can make interceptions, a guy that can cover very well. I think Richie Grant is easily possibly going to be the best rookie on the defensive side of the ball. He was, I think, was a number 2 pick for us, Richie Grant. So I definitely think that Richie Grant is going to be the guy on the defensive side of the ball that'll be the best rookie, hands down. Let's see here. Do you think Patterson will line up more at running back or wide receiver? Corey to God, I think when it comes to a guy like Cordero Patterson, he will be a guy that will mainly, I believe, play um, running back possibly. I really don't see them using him a whole lot as a wide receiver. I think he's going to be a guy that they use like in wildcat situations, a guy that they use mainly on special teams to be a return man on the kickoff returns and maybe even punt returns. I don't see him lining up a whole lot at wide receiver, like out wide, unless injury strike. Excuse me. If injuries take place, then I can see us using a guy like a Cordero Patterson mainly as a wide receiver. But unless someone gets injured, knock on wood, I really see a Cordero Patterson being used as a running back. I believe they said he was listed on the depth chart as a running back, and that was the reason that Arthur Smith wanted him on the roster, was mainly because of his special teams ability and also him playing for Dave Ragone, who's a guy we brought over from Chicago. I believe he's our quarterbacks coach now, but he was when he was over in Chicago, he helped Matt Nagy on the offensive side of the ball. So I think that they brought him in because he's familiar with Dave Ragone, and he's a guy that can help bolster the second, the help the second, not the secondary, but the special teams unit. I think he could be a guy that can help on special teams. So I definitely think that a Cordero Patterson is a guy that could really do some things. I don't really expect to see him a whole lot though on the offensive side of the ball. I think they're going to have him come in on special packages. I really think the wide receiver depth chart will go. Mike Davis probably will be the starter. Javion Hawkins probably will be the number 2 running back. Quadra Olison will probably be like a short yardage back, and the guy that we use in the red zone. And then Cordero Patterson probably will be like the third tier. Him and Quadra Olison will be guys that they use in special packages. I don't see those guys being guys that's used a whole lot on the offensive side of the ball. I think those guys are going to be used to catch screen passes when it comes to a guy like Cordell Patterson. I think you're going to see him with like bubble screens. You'll see him running the wildcat, and you'll mainly see him as a special teams player. But I think that's where he's going to make his biggest impact. I don't see him playing a ton of wide receiver or lining up like in the I formation as a traditional running back. This funny right here. He said, "What do you think about Mike Davis' pitcher?" Yeah, Mike Davis. I already called him basically the next Michael Turner. That's what he looks like to me when it comes to how he's built. He's built um, basically like a tree stump. He's very uh, short, low to the ground, great center of gravity. But it's, as we say, the low man wins in football. So I think Mike Davis is going to be a guy that's very hard to tackle. To me, he reminds me a lot of Michael Turner. Um, Also reminds me of Maurice Jones-Drew. If you remember when he played with the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Raiders, that's what he puts me in the mind of when I watch him play. He's a guy that's hard to tackle, a guy that's really elusive, and is a guy that fights for every yard. He's a guy that you don't see go backwards a ton. He's a guy that's going to go north and south, and he's going to mainly get positive yardage pretty much every play. So we're not going to see a lot of those Devontae Freeman loss of 3 and 4 or 5 yards dancing in the backfield. We're not going to see what we saw last year out of Todd Gurley when he was trying to bounce a lot of runs to the outside. Mike Davis is the guy that's going to hit the hole, and he's going to, hit the hole hard, and he's going to go forward, just like a Michael Turner when we had him here in Atlanta. So we're definitely going back to north-south physical style football, punch you in the mouth. And I definitely think that's something that Mike Davis is going to bring to the table. But it's just talking about the pitcher. Yeah, I seen. I'm saying that he doesn't miss any leg days and things of that nature. Yeah, it looks like he squats probably 700 to 800 pounds. Like Mike Davis is one of those guys that I definitely think is going to be a tone setter for this team. And if you remember, I always go back to last season when the Falcons faced the Carolina Panthers, the first meeting between the Carolina Panthers and the Falcons last year in Atlanta. Basically, Mike Davis ran through our defense, and he pretty much demoralized our defense because he was a guy that runs really hard. He's not going to go down after first contact. He's going to be a guy that lowers his pad level, and he's a guy that's very physical. So guys are not going to want to tackle that guy when it comes to the third and fourth quarters towards the end of games. When you're trying to ice the game, guys are not going to want to tackle a guy like Mike Davis who's running, with a full head of steam downhill. So I definitely love what Mike Davis brings to the table, and I think he's the perfect style running back for the offense that Arthur Smith is going to run. I definitely think his physicality and his attitude that he brings to the game is something that our Atlanta Falcons has been missing over the last couple seasons. But I really feel like everything starts up front with the offensive line. Like the offensive line having Arthur Smith as the head coach, I really think he's going to change the culture, and he's going to allow these guys like Jake Matthews, who talked about it in his press conference, that we're going to be a more physical defense, that we're going or more physical offense, that we're going to go downhill, we're going to run the ball, we're not going to just pass the ball 50 times a game and have these offensive linemen backpedaling the whole game. I really expect this offensive line to be nasty, be physical. Guys like Jalen Mayfield, who we brought in from Michigan. If you know anything about Michigan football, they're known for playing tough defense, and they're known for being a team that likes to run the ball and play physical up front on the offensive line. So I think a guy like Jalen Mayfield was perfect to add to this team. A guy like Drew Dalman coming over from Stanford, they're another team that believes in ground and pound. And having a coach like Arthur Smith, who came over from Tennessee, they were known for running the football. So I expect this Atlanta Falcons team to get back to running the football. And that's one of the reasons why I stated earlier, in the show, that I don't think losing Julio Jones. I do think that losing a talent like Julio Jones, it's not something that you can replace, but I don't think it's going to be as big of a deal as if we still had a guy like Dirk Cutter who relied on having, supreme talent on the outside. I really think Arthur Smith, being that everything is predicated off of being physical and everything is predicated off of that running game, I really think losing a Julio Jones is not going to be as big of a hit as a lot of people think it's going to be, based off of us having a guy like Arthur Smith that knows how to scheme guys open, and having a offensive mind that's willing to run the football and not rely on Matt Ryan to win every game for us, and not rely on the wide receivers to win every game for us, but to rely on our physicality and to wear out defenses by running the football. So I really think that Mike Davis is going to have a big year. And I think the running backs by committee is going to be great for this team. Not just Mike Davis, but the other guys that I mentioned, Cordero Patterson, Javion Hawkins. I think all of those guys are going to chip in, Quadre Olison. And I think it's going to be like a 3 to 4 headed monster coming at these teams out of the backfield for our Atlanta Falcons. Let's see. Tony Bright says John Cominsky had a lot of quarterback hits and knockdowns in 2020. I believe that OC Dean Pease can turn those hits by Cominsky into sacks with his coaching. Your thoughts? I agree. It's a good statement by Tony. I completely agree with you. I think a lot of these guys are going to play I think all of these guys, to be honest, are going to play better because they're not going to be on their heels. If you've seen the last couple seasons, when you're playing cover three, you're playing soft zone coverage, you're playing sticks defense on third and longs and things of that nature. When you're playing soft defense and things of that nature, it makes it hard for your guys to get after the quarterback and be physical when you're always on your heels. I really think that Dean Pease is going to allow these guys to go out and play fast, allow these guys to play physical, and also allow these guys to not think as much but react. A lot of the times when you're playing on your heels, you're playing cover three and things of that nature. I mentioned this a lot when we had Devondre Campbell here 2 years ago. He was always a step too slow because he always was caught in no man's land. Basically, he wasn't reacting. He was always overthinking, and I feel like that can really hurt your defense and can hurt your offense when you're always second guessing yourself and not reacting and just playing the game as it comes to you. And I think that that's going to be huge for Dean Pease. I think he's going to be off or a defensive coordinator for us that's going to come in and he's going to make offenses play to our terms, meaning we're going to show what we're going to do. If we're blitzing, we're not going to allow the offense to dictate to us what we do. I believe we're going to dictate to the offense. Look, we're blitzing. That ball's going to have to come out fast if you're a quarterback. Like we want to bring so much pressure that I think offenses are going to have to adjust to the style that we're playing. We're not going to be no longer adjusting to what offenses are doing to us. Because when Dan Quinn was here, mainly we always were the team that was on our heels, whether it was on offense or whether it was on defense the last 2 years. The offensive line was always on their heels because they were backpedaling and trying to pass protect. And then the defensive line and the defense was always on their heels because we always were dropping back into coverage and we were never, bringing pressure. When we did bring pressure, we seen, success. We saw early on in that game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when we had that 17-point lead, when they were bringing those zone blitz schemes, we had Tom Brady on the run. But then in the second half, when we dropped back into the soft zone coverages, we allowed Tom Brady to get into a rhythm. And that's when we seen teams, have our defense on their heels. Pretty much what's happened to us the last 3 to 4 seasons since Dan Quinn was here is basically being on our heels and the opposing team dictating to us, what they were going to do. So I definitely think that a guy like John Cominsky and everybody on this defensive line and on this defense, I think are going to play better. Even guys like Isaiah Oliver, who I talked about earlier, allowing him to be a guy that can use, the skill set that he has as far as being a guy that can roam, make tackles in space and things of that nature and be able to blitz, I think is going to play huge dividends. And he's not going to be out there thinking and, always being a step too slow. I really think that that's been the biggest issue. Mainly has been the coaching. Let's see. So we all forgot about Fabian Monroe. Yeah, Fabian Monroe is another guy that they basically said that he's kind of stood out in OTAs, that he was lining up at that second corner spot. He's another guy who's athletic and could possibly be the number 2 corner. I could see him definitely competing with a guy like Kendall Sheffield. He has more size than a guy like Kendall Sheffield. He's a little bit longer than a guy like Kendall Sheffield. And I think Fabian Monroe coming over from the Washington football team was a good pickup for the Atlanta Falcons. I do think that he's a guy that's still really young, and he's a guy that ran, I think, a 4.40. So he's a pretty fast corner, and he's a guy that's opportunistic as well. So I do think that Fabian Monroe is a solid number 2 corner, definitely better than what we had last season. I do think that a guy like Kendall Sheffield is taking a lot of slack this year, or taking a lot of flack last year. I do believe a lot of what we've seen out of a guy like Kendall Sheffield, if you remember last season, was he was injured earlier on coming into the season. I think they said he had like an ankle injury or a hamstring injury or something like that. He had a lower leg injury. So I really think that Kendall Sheffield, if he comes back healthy, he had a really good rookie year. I think this year, Kendall Sheffield, we could possibly see the best of a guy like Kendall Sheffield, because he's another guy who came out of Ohio State as a DB that can fly. He ran I think he runs like a 4.2 or 4.3. So he's really a fast corner as well. And I think that we could see Kendall Sheffield possibly take a step forward if he can get back healthy. I really think a lot of what we saw last year from a guy like Kendall Sheffield was due to his injuries. But I do think that Fabian Monroe is a guy that also is going to compete for that number two corner spot. And I think that he's going to be a solid number two if we decide to use him at that second corner spot. But I definitely think that he's an upgrade over a guy like Isaiah Oliver, who we started last year on the outside, because that just doesn't fit Isaiah Oliver's skill set playing on the outside. Let's see here. And this is a good comment here from Cartier Walker. He turns from a Tampa fan to Atlanta a Falcons fan. Y'all need defense to help Grady. If no help comes next year, Grady will leave also. I think that this is a good statement. I don't know if Grady Jarrett will leave because he's under contract, but I do believe that Grady Jarrett needs help on the defensive line. I've been saying this for years, that the Falcons needed to bring in a guy that can play on the inside next to him, because Grady Jarrett is not your traditional five tech or nose tackle. That's not what he does. Grady Jarrett is mainly a pass rusher and a three technique. That's where he plays best. He needs a running mate. So I really think that it would be imperative for our Falcons to bring in a guy that can play next to him. We're going to see what a guy like Marlon Davidson does, who battled COVID last year. We're going to see if he can get healthy this year and see what he can bring to the table at the nose position. And we're going to see what a guy like Tyler Davison and the guys that we brought in free agency, the two young guys we brought in that goes 320 pounds plus. We're going to see if those guys can help Grady Jarrett. But I do believe either way it goes, I believe that Grady Jarrett is going to have a pretty good season, because Dean Pease is going to put him in situations where he can succeed. I really think playing this more aggressive style defense where you're blitzing guys, you're going to catch teams off guard with those blitzes. A lot of the times when sacks happen, when you're blitzing, it's because the offensive line, they don't know what guy to pick up, because they don't know where the pressure is coming from. And I really feel like Grady Jarrett is going to see a couple of one-on-one matchups, because we're going to bring pressure. We're going to blitz linebackers. We're going to blitz safeties. So the offensive linemen are going to struggle at knowing who's coming, where they're coming from, and that's going to give Grady Jarrett basically a leg up on the offensive line. I really think that Grady Jarrett is going to get more one-on-one situations, because Dean Pease is not going to sit back and allow quarterbacks to get comfortable and allow offenses to do whatever they want. I think Dean Pease is going to dictate the tempo, and he's going to allow Grady Jarrett to eat. I also think Grady Jarrett's going to have a really good season, because we have brought in a number of bodies up front. Because if you remember last season, Grady Jarrett really played mainly 90% of the snaps. Like, Grady Jarrett rarely came off the field. Anytime he came off the field, it was just because he was extra winded. So I really think him having us doing these line shifts where we're going to be bringing in multiple guys on the defensive line, that's going to keep a guy like Grady Jarrett fresh. So when the fourth quarter rolls around, he's not gassed, because he's been getting breaks throughout the game. And I really think that that's very important. And I believe that's the reason why Terry Fontenot brought in as many guys as he brought in on these one-year deals. I really believe he brought in guys like Barkevious Mingo. He brought in, all of these guys he brought in on these one-year deals. He brought them in to add depth on this defensive line. The reason we brought in those two young guys that off of free agency after the draft, the guys that we signed that both are 300 plus, 320 plus pounds, I believe we brought those guys in to help Grady Jarrett possibly be able to stay healthy and stay fresh, because a lot of the times Grady Jarrett in those games were gassed because he's getting double team, triple team. So I really think that this year we're going to see a huge step forward for Grady Jarrett. I'm not too worried about seeing Grady Jarrett leave, unless they just continue to, neglect the defensive side of the ball, which I really doubt that Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith, being that those guys believe in physical football, them coming over from a team like the New Orleans Saints that is really good on their defensive line and offensive line. I really think that our offensive line and defensive line is not going to be a problem moving forward, because we have a former offensive lineman in Arthur Smith and a former or a new GM, but he basically was over as a scout with the Saints in Terry Fontenot, and he understands the importance of the line of scrimmage and winning the line of scrimmage. Let's see here. But that was a great question. Let's see. Kerry says, I think Deion Jones is going to go crazy under Dean Pease. I'm happy to say once I'm excited to see our defense. I agree completely with you on this comment, Kerry, and I definitely think that Deion Jones and a Foye Oluokun, both of those guys are going to have huge years. I think the whole linebacking core, Michael Walker, Barkevius Mingo, Dante Fowler, I think that those guys are going to have big seasons. I really think that Deion Jones is going to be one of those guys that could easily be a Pro Bowler this year because of his athleticism, his speed. I could really see Deion Jones having another 5+ sacks this year and maybe 3 or 4 interceptions, maybe a interception returned or a fumble recovery return for a touchdown. Because I believe every season that Deion Jones has been on our team, he's returned a defensive touchdown. Pretty much every year he's been on the team, he's had a defensive touchdown. So Deion Jones is definitely a star. I'm glad that they decided to restructure his deal and keep him here for the foreseeable future because I do think that Deion Jones is probably one of the best kept secrets in the NFL and one of the best linebackers in the NFL. Other than a guy like Bobby Wagner, I think Deion Jones is right there in the upper echelon in the top 5 when it comes to Mike linebackers or just linebackers in general because the NFL has went into more of a spread offense, open style offense. You have to have linebackers that can cover, and that's what Deion Jones does best is coverage. So I definitely think that Deion Jones is going to have a great year, and I completely agree with you there, Kerry, and saying that under Dean Pease, this defense is going to be great. I really do think that he's going to bring that aggressive style defense, and that's what we need. We need that aggressiveness on the defensive side of the ball. It's going to be huge. Let's see here. And y'all keep those questions coming. I see Tony Wright says it's time to take training wheels off. Hopefully, a healthy Marlon Davidson, and he can get back to balling like he did at Auburn. I completely agree with this statement as well. As you guys know, I am an Auburn Tigers fan in college football, so I pretty much watched a lot of snaps of Marlon Davidson. Personally, coming out of college, I did want us to take his running mate, Derek Brown, who's actually a Carolina Panther, because you guys know I wanted him to be that nose in the middle next to Grady Jarrett, which I think those two guys would have been an unstoppable duo. But I do think that Marlon Davidson is one of those guys who kind of got overlooked in that draft. And I do think that he was actually a good draft pick by Thomas Dimitroff and taking a guy like Marlon Davidson. I really think that the injuries and COVID really played a huge part in him being not being able to get a lot of playing time last year. But I do agree that Marlon Davidson, it's time for him to take the next step. Like I said before, there were no OTAs, mini camps and things of that nature last season due to COVID-19. So I do think that also played a factor in a lot of these rookies being able to get on the field, being able to learn the playbook and things of that nature, not being able to get that hands-on experience. But I do think that this year, Marlon Davidson is going to take a step forward. I do think that he's a guy that could possibly be one of the young breakout stars on the defensive side of the ball. And especially because we're going to have preseason games this year. A lot of people are not talking about us having preseason. Preseason is huge, especially for guys that are trying to earn playing time or trying to earn a job, period, on a team or on the practice squad. Having those games, those games to play in where it's high level of competition because guys are competing for jobs. I definitely think that that's going to be huge for these young guys that didn't get a lot of playing time last year to be able to. You can't simulate in practice, especially nowadays because the padded practices are limited in the NFL. It's hard to simulate game speed in practice, simulate physicality in practice. But I definitely think that having those preseason games is going to play a huge role in a lot of these young players' development. And I think Marlon Davidson is one of those guys that's going to benefit from getting a lot of playing time in the preseason and also getting a lot of playing time in the actual games. I do think that Marlon Davidson is going to be one of those guys that can possibly earn playing time through the preseason and could possibly be a starter. I mean, I do think that Tyler Davidson better watch his back because a guy like Marlon Davidson could definitely be a guy that can take his job, his starting role, because there's no more favoritism. At this point, Arthur Smith is looking for these guys to compete, and they said that they're going to put the best players out there on the field. So at this point, no one's job is guaranteed. No one's starting job pretty much on the defensive side of the ball is guaranteed. So I definitely think that Marlon Davidson could compete for a starting role and definitely can compete for a lot of playing time this year. Let's see here. Says, Drew, how do you think John Kaminsky will get utilized in Dean Peate's scheme? I really think that John Kaminsky, and I've said this for years since we first drafted John Kaminsky, to me, he's a defensive end. I would use John Kaminsky when we go into those 4-3 schemes. I would use him as a defensive end. I think that's where he would be best suited at the defensive end position. To me, he reminds me of a Patrick Kearney type. He's like 6'5", 285 pounds. And I think that John Kaminsky is a guy that is like your traditional defensive end. He reminds me a lot of a guy like Ryan Kerrigan. That's who he puts me in the mind of when I watch him play. I think he's like a Ryan Kerrigan type, Patrick Kearney type. He's a guy that plays best with his hand in the dirt, but he's athletic and he has very long arms. So I would use him on the edge. When Dan Quinn was here with Raheem Morris in that regime, they like to use him a lot on the inside. But I think that John Kaminsky is a little bit undersized to play on the inside as far as weight, because he's not a 300+ pound guy. He's just a guy that's very physical and has long arms, and is a guy that's really athletic. So I feel like if you put him out in space on the edge and allow him to bend the corner, because he's a guy that's very athletic and agile, I think he could be a guy in those 4-3 looks. When you have somebody with their hand in the dirt, I think John Kaminsky will be a great defensive end, and that's why I see him playing. Another guy he kind of reminds me of, if you guys remember, back in the days, a couple years back, maybe about 5, 6, 7 years back, is a guy like Jared Allen that played with the Minnesota Vikings and the Kansas City Chiefs, and also a little bit with the Chicago Bears. Jared Allen was one of those guys that could come off the edge. He was played with a high motor. Wasn't the most athletic. He was a guy that never gave up on plays, and that's what John Kaminsky reminds me of. He reminds me of a guy like a Jared Allen, a poor man's Jared Allen, very physical, plays with a high motor, and never really gives up on plays. So I think he could run into a sack because he's so, his motor is so high that he's the guy that can chase down a quarterback from behind because he's not going to give up on a play. Let's see here. Let's see. He says, "What's good, Drew? What's going on?" He said, "Who is the unrestricted free agents on defense you think we will make the team, or just the undrafted free agents?" I think he's referring to. Um, I'm not too sure, to be honest with you. I think on the defensive side of the ball, it will have to be one of the guys that we picked up, one of the young guys, one of those nose tackles that we picked up. I could easily see one of those guys making the defense, and then the other guy maybe being placed on the practice squad, because we don't have a ton of guys that's 315 pounds and plus. Most of our guys, because Dan Quinn played a smallish defense, most of our guys are like 300 pounds or barely 300 pounds. Like Grady Jarrett is a guy on his best day, he's probably like 300 to 305. So I think that it's going to be important that we keep some of these guys that's 320 pounds plus on the roster, because we're going to be mainly playing a 3-4 defense, and you need those guys that has the size and has that weight that can hold up and prevent the offensive lineman for getting to that second level in the run game. So I definitely think that as far as undrafted guys, undrafted free agents, I definitely think that it'll be one of those young guys that we brought in, one of those nose tackles. I could easily see them making the roster, the 53, and then maybe the other guy that we brought in, because we brought in two nose tackles that were undrafted guys. I can see one of the guys possibly making it to the 53, and then I can see one of the other guys possibly being put on the practice squad. But those are the only two guys that I can say off the top of my head that I definitely think will make the squad. just because of their size. We don't have enough size on the team, so you're going to need guys that are physical. You're going to need those guys. Let's see. Says Juice, since AJ Terrell had an underrated rookie season, do you think he will show how good he is? I definitely do. And this is a great question as well. I do think that AJ Terrell is going to have a big season. I really think it's hard to get interceptions. It was hard to get interceptions last year in the type of defense that Dan Quinn and the last regime ran because we didn't play a lot of press man. We didn't blitz the quarterback a whole lot. So it's hard to force turnovers when you're not bringing pressure or you're not able to get pressure on a quarterback. And a quarterback has all day to scan the field. You know, receivers can break their routes off and things of that nature. And being that the nature of the beast now in the NFL is you can't really touch guys without getting flagged. It's really tough to play the cornerback position in today's game. So I really think that AJ Terrell and all of our cornerbacks are going to have a chance at making plays on the ball, making more interceptions because the ball is going to have to come out a lot faster than it was the last couple of years, being that we didn't blitz the quarterback, being that quarterbacks knew and offenses knew and offensive coordinators knew that the Atlanta Falcons defense were going to sit back in zone coverage and we weren't going to really pressure. They knew that they could basically sit back there and have all day to pretty much throw the ball and take what the defense was giving them. Because a lot of the teams that beat us, they would just throw the ball underneath to running backs. They would throw the ball short and then just pick up yardage off of yak plays. If you remember when we faced the New Orleans Saints without Drew Brees, they pretty much picked us apart with short passes with Taysom Hill because Taysom Hill is not accurate at all from no stretch of the imagination, and he pretty much picked us apart on short passes because the Falcons were dropping back in that soft zone coverage. So I definitely think that all of our cornerbacks, no matter who it is, are going to be much improved because these guys are going to be able to attack the football and be able to, make plays. And AJ Terrell is a guy that likes to bait, quarterbacks and things of that nature. And he's a guy that's opportunistic when it comes to reading the quarterback's eyes and jumping routes and things of that nature. So I definitely think AJ Terrell is going to have a huge year. I'm not too sure how many interceptions he'll come away with because teams may decide to stay away from a guy like AJ Terrell. Once he makes a couple plays, they may decide to try to pick on a guy like Fabian Monroe, kind of like last year. Even when AJ Terrell was a rookie, quarterbacks really didn't go after AJ Terrell. They early on in the season, they really picked on Isaiah Oliver and Kendall Sheffield. They really didn't even look AJ Terrell's way. They didn't even throw a bunch of passes his way. So I really think that it's going to be up to those other guys like Fabian Monroe. It's going to be up to those young guys like Darren Hall, who we brought in from Fresno. I think it was actually San Diego State. That's going to see a lot of balls thrown his way because he's a younger guy. And I think a lot of quarterbacks are going to stay away from throwing towards a guy like AJ Terrell due to him being one of the best young corners in the game and being possibly the best corner on our team. I don't really see teams trying to test AJ Terrell too much this year. Let's see here. And I'm about to get ready to wind this thing down because we've been going for about an hour, 30 minutes. So I'll take a couple more questions from you guys. If you guys have a couple more questions, we can tackle this real quick. He said, do we still have Laquan Treadwell? No. Laquan Treadwell, I think, is a free agent. Now, that's a good name to bring up because I think that Laquan Treadwell did some good things for us later on in the season last year. Once Julio Jones basically was on the injured list, I think that Laquan Treadwell could be a guy maybe that the Falcons take a second look at if Julio Jones is traded, if we want to bring in another wide receiver. But I definitely think at this point, we're pretty set at the wide receiver position. But if we wanted to bring in a big body, Mohamed Sanu style wide receiver, I think Laquan Treadwell did a really good job when he got opportunities last year. His opportunities was just few far in between. Like he didn't get a fair shake on, getting playing time. He really didn't. We didn't see Laquan Treadwell, I think, until like after week 10 or 11. The first play I remember him making, I think, was against the Chargers, the LA Chargers. I think he scored his first touchdown. But when he actually got in the game, he actually made plays. So I do think that Laquan Treadwell is a guy that deserved another shot with our team. I think it's just we have so many guys at that wide receiver position at this point. I think they just decided to let him go because of the cap situation. But I definitely think that Laquan Treadwell could be a guy that's picked up by another team, or if we have injuries, maybe Laquan Treadwell is a guy we give another look at. But he played well when he actually got on the field last year, and I like physical wide receivers that can make contested catches. He did a good job of making contested catches, and being a big body guy. When the ball was thrown his way, he definitely caught it. He didn't drop any passes from what I remember. So I definitely like what Laquan Treadwell brought to the table. Let's see here. So Antonio says, Jew, who else you see making this team in the undrafted class besides Hawkins? Um, it possibly be the guys that I named already, the defensive tackles that we brought in. On the offensive side of the ball, I don't really think that it's going to be a ton of undrafted guys that make the roster because we're so talented on the offensive side of the ball. Hawkins to me is a surefire guy that's going to make the squad because we didn't draft a running back and because we don't have a ton of running backs on the squad already. I definitely think that Hawkins is going to make the team because we really don't have a guy on the roster that can do what Hawkins can do as far as being a scat back. Ito Smith was a guy that was similar to a Hawkins. To me, he just wasn't as explosive as a Javion Hawkins. So I definitely think that Javion Hawkins, to me, will possibly be a lock to make the team. Of course, he's going to have to prove it on the field in the preseason and things of that nature. But I could easily see Javion Hawkins. If you go look at the man's tape in college, dude is just explosive. So I definitely think that he's definitely going to make the roster. He's the only guy that I have penciled in right now to definitely make the 53-man roster as far as the undrafted class. Other than that, I'm not too sure, of other guys that may make it other than the no tackles that I mentioned because we don't have a ton of guys that's 320 plus pounds. So we basically have to sign one of those guys or allow one of those guys to make the 53-man roster unless we bring in someone else that can play that role. Let's see here. Albert says, Jew, I understand why everyone is mad at Julio, but Rodgers do the same way as Julio, and nobody said anything about Rodgers. No, I think the Packers fan base is upset with Aaron Rodgers from what I hear in the media. They say that in many camps or OTAs, the top, I think, 5 receivers or something like that for the Green Bay Packers didn't show up to OTAs. And they kind of the fans blame Aaron Rodgers for that. They were saying basically that they planned that maybe, I guess, Aaron Rodgers contacted those guys and they want Aaron Rodgers to get another contract and they want the Packers organization to give Aaron Rodgers more leeway, more of a say as far as the way that things are ran in Green Bay. So I definitely think that Aaron Rodgers is feeling the heat, kind of like Julio at this point. He may not be getting the same flack, but I definitely think that the Green Bay Packers fan base is upset with a guy like Aaron Rodgers based off of him basically stating that he wants out. Basically, he either wants a new contract or he wants the GM there that they have there fired. So I definitely think that Aaron Rodgers is getting flack. I just think that Julio Jones is the most recent thing in the news, and Julio Jones is not known for being a guy that's outspoken. So I think that Julio Jones situation kind of caught everybody off guard, and that's the reason you're hearing more about the Julio Jones situation in the media more than you're hearing the Aaron Rodgers at this point. But let's see. And this is funny right here from Tack. Says, is Russell Gage really wide receiver number 2? I would say, yeah. I definitely think that Russell Gage, if Julio Jones leaves, Russell Gage is your number 2 wide receiver. So I think Russell Gage is more than capable of being that number 2 a wide receiver role because he's not going to be asked to do everything that Julio Jones and Ridley has been asked to do on the outside. I really think that Kyle Pitts and Hayden Hurst and the tight ends on this roster are going to have a bigger role than they had when a guy like Dirk Cutter was here, who couldn't stand throwing the ball to tight ends for whatever reason. I really think that Hayden Hurst should have been used a lot more last season. But Dirk Cutter, for whatever reason, he didn't like throwing the ball in the middle of the field. He didn't like to throw the ball to a guy like Hayden Hurst, who should have had a lot more yardage and a lot more catches last year and a lot more touchdowns. But we didn't take advantage of having a guy like Hayden Hurst. But I do believe with a guy like Arthur Smith here, he's going to take advantage of a guy like Arthur Smith. A guy like Hayden Hurst and a guy like Kyle Pitts. He's going to use those guys. So I definitely think that Russell Gage is the number 2 wide receiver if Julio is traded. But I don't expect Russell Gage to have more receiving yards than a guy like Kyle Pitts or even a guy like Hayden Hurst, depending on if Julio is gone. If Julio is gone, I definitely think that Kyle Pitts becomes the main guy, the focal point of the offense. Him and Hayden Hurst will be the focal point. Other than Calvin Ridley on the outside as the number 1 wide receiver, I think throwing the ball across the middle of the field in play action situations, I think is going to be what the offense is going to be predicated on. Similar to when we had Kyle Shanahan here, where everything was predicated off of play action pass and things of that nature. So I definitely think that Russell Gage could be the number 2 guy, but I don't expect Russell Gage to be like a guy that they're focusing on, kind of how they focused on Calvin Ridley last year as the number 1 and number 2 wide receiver. I really think that the focal point will be Kyle Pitts, Hayden Hurst, and Ridley. I think that those are going to be the main 3 targets, and Russell Gage will fall somewhere 3rd or 4th in that pecking order. But I'm gonna take like 2 more questions and then I'm gonna call it a night. I'm gonna give you guys your night back because I know you guys want to check out the NBA playoffs and things that are going on. But I do thank you guys for tuning in, as always. But let's see here. So Tony says, with head coach Arthur Smith calling the plays and working hands-on with Matt Ryan, do you believe that he can possibly have another MVP caliber season? Yeah, Tony, I said this a little bit earlier in the show. I definitely think that Matt Ryan is going to take a leap forward this year as far as the MVP category. I do think that he's going to be one of the guys, especially if Julio is not here and he has this team in playoff contention. I definitely think that Matt Ryan is going to be in the MVP category. If he can get this team, I'll say like 11, 12 wins, and he's like top 5 in passing yards and maybe top 5 in touchdown passes, I definitely think that Matt Ryan is going to get a lot of praise, especially if Julio is traded, because a lot of people believe that Matt Ryan's success comes from playing with a guy like Julio Jones. And I do agree that all quarterbacks need, great weapons around them. I do think that Matt Ryan has benefited from playing with a guy like Julio Jones, but I also have seen Matt Ryan play with lesser talent before Julio Jones came into the fold. He was throwing the ball to guys like Michael Jenkins, Roddy White, Harry Douglas, who he made 1,000 yards, made a 1,000-yard receiver the year that Julio Jones went down with injury. So I definitely think that Matt Ryan is going to prove a lot of the doubters wrong. And I definitely think that he's a guy that's a dark horse for being an MVP or being in the MVP category, especially if the Falcons have a winning season and he's right up there, top 5 again in passing yards like he was last season. And if he's right back in that 4,000 yard, passing, passing range in passing yardage, I definitely think Matt Ryan will be right there in that MVP category again. Let's see here. And this will be my last question that I'll take tonight. And it's from Scotty. He says, is Calvin Ridley ready to be the number 1 wide receiver for Atlanta Falcons? I definitely think that Calvin Ridley is ready to go ahead and take that next step. Now, we don't know until we see him actually out there on the field. But I talked about this a little bit earlier in the show as well, that I think last year, Julio Jones being injured was a blessing in disguise. I really think that him going down with that injury was a blessing in disguise for our team, because we kind of got to see what Calvin Ridley, what Russell Gage could do without Julio Jones on the field, and it helped boost their confidence. Like a lot of the times as fans, I think we forget that these guys' confidence, they're human beings just like we are. being, the playing that number one role or being listed as the number one wide receiver when the best receiver is not in the game, and you're still out there, being covered now by the number one corner of the other team, and like I say, public enemy number one on the opposing defense's, chalkboard. I definitely think that Calvin Ridley and Russell Gage, both of those guys gained confidence last year. Calvin Ridley was able to catch or over 1,000 yards for his first time in his career. He had about 1,300 yards receiving last year, and I think that really boosted his confidence. He finally finished the season without being injured. The last, I think, the first 2 years of Calvin Ridley's career, he actually was injured. Leaving the season, he kind of limped out of the first 2 seasons. So him being able to complete the season healthy last year, him leading the team in receiving yards, him leading the team in touchdown catches, I think that really boosted a guy like Calvin Ridley's confidence, and even a guy like Russell Gage. I really think he caught almost 800 yards last year, and I think that his confidence also was boosted because he pretty much was the number 2 wide receiver for most of the season last year when Julio Jones went out due to injury for those 7 games. It pretty much was the Calvin Ridley and Russell Gage show. So I definitely think that those guys were able to gain that confidence, and I think that's going to be huge this year. If Julio Jones is traded and is not on the team, I think that it's going to be huge for the confidence. Those guys are going to have great confidence coming into this season, knowing that they were able to pretty much ball out last season. Even though we didn't win a lot of games, those guys caught a lot of passes, racked up a lot of yardage, and those guys were able to see what they were able to do without Julio Jones on the field. Because a lot of the times, Calvin Ridley, Russell Gage, those guys didn't get the credit that they deserve, or they don't get the credit that they deserve when a guy like Julio Jones is on the field, because he's getting all of the double teams and he's getting all of the attention from the defense. But they proved last year in a couple games that Julio Jones didn't play, they kind of proved that they could do they could do big things without Julio Jones on the field. Calvin Ridley was, being guarded by the best corners in the league, and he showed that he could, still go out and beat man-to-man coverage pretty much against anybody. And he was able to put up the numbers that he wanted to put up, because going into the season last year, Calvin Ridley talked about wanting to clips 1,000 yards receiving. And to me, he was a borderline Pro Bowler. He almost made the Pro Bowl. He was right there, but it was just a couple guys like Justin Jefferson from the Vikings that were able to. He was basically snubbed due to a couple of guys that had breakout years. But I do think that Calvin Ridley was Pro Bowl worthy, and I do think that this year Calvin Ridley is going to get a chance. If Julio is traded, he's going to get the chance to earn that big contract that he's looking for. He's also going to be able to make a name for himself as being the leader in that wide receiver room. So with that being said, I do appreciate each and every one of you guys for tuning in to my first live show. I do appreciate you guys continuing to support my channel. Go over to Jew Talk Sports. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, hit that subscribe button for your boy. If you haven't hit that like button on this video, please hit that like button. If you haven't went over to Atlanta Falcons Nation, please go over to Atlanta Falcons Nation as well. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button for us there as well. We're going to have a lot more coming for you guys. I'm going to have a lot more content coming for you guys on my show as well. But I do appreciate each and every one of you guys for continuing to tune in. I definitely believe we'll also have a show, as we always do, on Friday Night Madness. So you guys are definitely going to want to tune in for that. And we're going to have a lot more coming for you guys this upcoming season. I'm definitely excited this week coming up for mandatory mini camp to see if Julio Jones shows, to see what these guys look like in mini camp. But with that being said, this being your boy Jew. Like I said, as always, Falcons Nation, rise up, and I'll see you guys next week on Wednesday. With that being said, peace.